The cameras would never show it. But those who have been closest to Prince Harry whisper of a weight so heavy it has begun to bend his shoulders. For years, he has been both the soldier who served in Afghanistan and the grieving boy who walked behind his mother's coffin. He has spoken publicly about mental health, about therapy, about the demons that stalk even the privileged when grief is never properly healed. And yet, behind the closed doors of his California mansion, a doctor's quiet confirmation has lit a fuse. Harry has been privately battling a severe mental breakdown. It is a revelation that could shake not only his own image but the empire he and Meghan Markle have so carefully built. And according to sources close to the situation, Meghan forced the doctor to hide it. The scene feels almost cinematic. A doctor with solemn eyes, a file he doesn't want to sign off on, and a duchess pressing him to keep silent. The stakes are higher than any hospital chart or prescription pad. This is about brand power, billion-dollar partnerships, and the image of a couple that has sold itself as the new face of royalty in America. In that moment, it isn't just about Harry's mental health. It's about whether the truth will endanger everything they've fought for since leaving Buckingham Palace. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But how did we get here? To understand this, you have to go back to Harry's public unraveling and Meghan's relentless campaign to reshape his story. On the surface, their life looks glamorous. Montecito mansions, red carpet events, multi-million-dollar Netflix deals. But beneath the sheen of Hollywood lights lies a darker reality. Harry, still haunted by the loss of his mother and his battles with the press, has reportedly spiraled into something much worse than ordinary stress. Friends noticed erratic behavior. Staff described withdrawn silences followed by bursts of anger. And when the doctor gave his assessment, the diagnosis was one word that no brand wants attached to its golden couple: breakdown. This is where the story becomes chilling. Instead of leaning into the truth and seeking open healing, the very message Harry has championed for others, Meghan allegedly insisted the doctor bury it. Why? Because a confession like that could tarnish the carefully crafted image of resilience, power, and partnership that keeps Netflix, Spotify, and publishing houses writing checks. It could turn a multi-million-dollar empire into a liability overnight. For Meghan, the risk wasn't just Harry's fragile mind. It was the collapse of their global influence. Imagine the tension in that room. A husband broken by memories and pressure, a doctor bound by ethics and compassion, and a wife whose eyes are fixed not on the man but on the empire. This is the kind of collision that defines not just marriages but history itself. And in that silence, with the pen hovering above the page, the course of their future shifted. The public, of course, sees none of this. They see smiling photographs at charity galas, rehearsed moments of tenderness on camera, carefully edited documentaries meant to position the Sussexes as victims turned visionaries. But behind those carefully chosen frames lies a truth that feels more Shakespearean than cinematic. A prince trapped not by monarchy this time, but by marriage, fame, and the pressure to live as a brand rather than as a human being. And here's the tragedy that pulls us in deeper. Harry has long been the face of honesty about mental health. He co-founded the Heads Together campaign. He has given tearful speeches about therapy saving his life. He has told young veterans and grieving children to speak up, to never hide their pain. Yet now, if these accounts are true, he has been muzzled in the one moment when honesty could have saved him. The irony is brutal, and the cost could be catastrophic. This is why the doctor's confirmation matters so much. It is not just about one man's suffering. It is about a global figure being silenced in his most vulnerable hour. It is about the tension between personal truth and public image, between health and wealth, between survival and spectacle. The fact that Meghan would pressure the doctor to conceal it raises not just questions about their marriage, but about the morality of building an empire on secrets. And this is not unprecedented. History is littered with royal figures whose illnesses were hidden for the sake of image. King George VI's lung cancer concealed until his death. Princess Margaret's struggles with depression whispered but never declared. Even Diana's battles with bulimia and mental health were hidden behind closed doors until she broke the silence herself. Harry now stands at that same precipice. Will his truth be buried for the sake of optics, or will it burst into the open with consequences no one can control? The introduction of this story is not meant to give you easy answers. It is meant to lay bare the gravity of what we're dealing with. A doctor confirms the darkest fears. A wife allegedly silences him. A husband sinks deeper. And a global audience, unknowingly, consumes a version of events that may be nothing more than smoke and mirrors. As you listen, ask yourself, what does it mean when love and loyalty are traded for contracts and image? What would you do if the person you vowed to protect was suffering, but the truth of their suffering could destroy your entire world? Would you fight for the truth, or would you bury it? Because that is the heart of the drama you're about to hear. A prince who may be too broken to fight. A wife who may be too ambitious to let the truth out. And a doctor who carries a secret that could dismantle the very narrative the world has been sold. We are only scratching the surface here. In the chapters ahead, we will peel back the layers of Harry's breakdown, Meghan's alleged control, the billion-dollar deals that hang in the balance, and the royal family's silent watch as this all unfolds. What happens when a man's pain becomes a bargaining chip in a marriage that doubles as a business empire? Stay with me, because what comes next will make you question everything you thought you knew about Harry and Meghan. There is a moment in every story where the mask begins to slip, and for Prince Harry that moment may already have passed. When he walked away from royal duties in 2020, many believed he was finally carving a path to freedom, a life beyond the suffocating traditions of Buckingham Palace. Yet freedom has its price, and the weight of being both an exile and a symbol has proven heavier than even he may have expected. Behind the smiling images of beach walks and garden interviews, a different picture has been forming. A prince quietly crumbling under the very pressures he once swore to leave behind. It is this reality that the doctor confirmed, and it is this reality that Meghan, according to sources, fought desperately to suppress. The beginning of this story demands an honest reckoning with the contradiction at its heart. Harry is a man who has long positioned himself as a champion for mental health. He co-created initiatives, spoke at global events, and partnered with some of the biggest organizations in the world to tell people that vulnerability is strength. He told the world, "You are not alone." Yet when his own breakdown came, he was alone in the one place it mattered most, his own home. If the whispers are to be believed, he sought help, and in doing so placed his trust in a doctor who saw not just stress or anxiety, but a full collapse. And then came Meghan, whose insistence on secrecy would shape not just his treatment, but the future of their public image. This is not just a domestic drama. It is a saga with global stakes. Millions follow their every move. Corporations have invested fortunes into their brand, and the world's media hangs on their words. A revelation of Harry's collapse would ripple across every contract, every interview, every headline. For Meghan, the question was simple. Could she allow this truth to become public, knowing it might brand Harry not as a figure of resilience, but as a liability? For Harry, the question was even more brutal. Could he trust his own wife to put his health above their empire? The middle of this story begins to peel back the layers. To understand the pressure Harry faces, we must remember his life has been a chain of loss and duty. At just 12 years old, he walked behind his mother's coffin as the world watched. His grief was televised, dissected, turned into spectacle. He grew up in the shadow of an older brother destined for the throne, constantly reminded that he was the spare, not the heir. His military service in Afghanistan gave him purpose, but it also left scars, trauma that surfaced years later in nightmares and panic attacks. His marriage to Meghan was supposed to be the start of something new, but instead it has become yet another arena of relentless scrutiny, only this time magnified by Hollywood lights and corporate contracts. When the doctor confirmed that Harry was in the grip of a mental breakdown, it wasn't a shock to those who had been paying close attention. The signs were all there. The flashes of anger in interviews, the glassy-eyed stares during public appearances, the moments of detachment where his words seemed rehearsed rather than heartfelt. Those close to him described a man who oscillated between bursts of energy and long stretches of silence. But where others might have seen a cry for help, Meghan reportedly saw a crisis that could not be allowed to reach the public. She had fought too hard to build their image as survivors, fighters, and leaders. To admit that Harry was broken risked undermining everything. And so the doctor was pressed, sources claim, into silence. Confidential files locked away, the language softened, the truth buried beneath medical euphemism. The risk of exposure wasn't just reputational, it was financial. The couple's Netflix deal alone, rumored at nearly $100 million, hinged on their ability to produce compelling content about their resilience, their triumph, their vision. What investor would want to bankroll a man too fragile to perform? What producer would gamble on a prince who might collapse in the middle of filming? In Meghan's calculation, silence was not cruelty, it was survival. Yet here lies the moral fault line that makes this story so gripping. Is protecting a brand worth sacrificing the truth of a husband's pain? Can love truly coexist with the relentless pursuit of influence and power? The middle of this introduction drives us into the heart of that conflict. Meghan, ambitious and calculating, has always presented herself as a woman in control. Harry, vulnerable and idealistic, has always been the one who wears his heart on his sleeve. Now, those roles are colliding. The more he suffers, the harder she fights to control the narrative. The result is a marriage not just of two people, but of two competing realities, the one the world sees, and the one lived in the shadows of Montecito. But the story cannot end in silence. The whispers are already slipping through the cracks. Staffers who have seen the strain, friends who have noticed Harry's absence from key events, photographs that reveal tension behind forced smiles. Each detail adds weight to the suspicion that not all is well behind the gates of their California estate. And now, with the doctor's confirmation quietly surfacing, the stakes have never been higher. The end of this introduction must leave us standing on the edge of revelation. What does it mean if Meghan truly forced silence on a doctor bound to protect his patient? What does it mean if Harry, the global face of mental health advocacy, has been denied his own truth? It means we are no longer dealing with a personal struggle, but with a public deception. It means that the very empire they built on authenticity may be crumbling under the weight of its own contradictions. And so we arrive at the final question that will guide every chapter to come. What happens when a man's collapse is hidden, not for his own dignity, but for the survival of a brand? This is where the story begins, with a doctor's solemn words, a wife's desperate insistence, and a husband whose pain may be the most dangerous secret of all. The breaking point never comes all at once. It creeps in slowly, invisible to the outside world, until one day it is undeniable. For Prince Harry, the unraveling began with a series of moments that seemed small at the time. A tense exchange at a charity gala, a canceled appearance blamed on exhaustion, the withdrawn look that cameras occasionally caught when Meghan spoke beside him. Individually, they could be dismissed. Together, they painted the picture of a man fraying at the edges. By the time the doctor confirmed what those close to him already feared, Harry had crossed into territory that could no longer be hidden without consequence. To understand the weight Harry carried, you have to step into his shoes during those years after leaving the royal family. He had walked away from the monarchy with the hope of finding peace, but peace never came. Instead, he traded one form of pressure for another. No longer hounded by palace courtiers, he now bore the weight of being the centerpiece of a new empire. One built not on centuries of tradition, but on contracts, appearances, and image. Every move he made had to be monetized. Every word he spoke was dissected. The very freedom he sought became another form of entrapment. Those around him began to notice subtle changes. He became quieter in meetings, often staring at the floor as Meghan filled the silence. Friends from his military days said he was harder to reach, sometimes ignoring calls altogether. Even the way he carried himself shifted, shoulders hunched, smile absent, eyes distant. For a man who had once stood before crowds with the confidence of a soldier and the passion of an advocate, the transformation was unmistakable. It was not the Harry the world knew. It was a man weighed down by something unseen. At home, the pressure mounted. Montecito was supposed to be their sanctuary, but the sprawling mansion quickly turned into a fortress where tension brewed. Staff whispered of arguments that echoed through its vast hallways. Simple decisions, whether to attend an event, what to say in an interview, how to present themselves to the world, became battlegrounds. Harry, once decisive, seemed paralyzed by doubt. Meghan, fiercely ambitious, filled the silence with plans, strategies, and demands. It was a dynamic that left him retreating further into himself, each step pulling him closer to the breaking point. It was during one particularly intense stretch, when Netflix deadlines loomed, Book releases were being negotiated, and Meghan was strategizing their next public move, that Harry reportedly collapsed emotionally. Sources recall him sitting in his study, papers scattered across the desk, staring blankly at the wall, as if the weight of the world had finally crushed him. When the doctor was called, the assessment was grim. This was not ordinary stress. This was a breakdown, a collapse born from years of grief, conflict, and relentless pressure. The diagnosis should have been a turning point toward healing. Instead, it became a secret to bury. Meghan's response was not relief that the truth had been named, but fear of what that truth could unleash. She understood the stakes better than anyone. Their brand was built on the image of a strong, united couple rising above the monarchy's cruelty. If Harry was revealed to be fragile, broken, unable to cope, it could unravel everything. Netflix might walk away. Publishers might reconsider. Even their carefully curated public sympathy could vanish, replaced with criticism that Harry was unfit to carry the responsibilities they had claimed. But in silencing the diagnosis, Meghan only tightened the noose around Harry's neck. The very act of hiding his pain deepened his isolation. For someone already struggling with trust, the knowledge that even his doctor had been pressed into secrecy must have felt like betrayal. Instead of finding refuge in honesty, he was now a prisoner of silence. Every public appearance became another mask he was forced to wear, another layer of performance on top of his crumbling interior. This is where the true tragedy of the breaking point lies. For Harry, the collapse was not simply about his personal struggles. It was about the unbearable weight of contradictions. He was the man who told the world to speak openly about mental health, yet he was muzzled when his own voice needed to be heard. He was the prince who longed for authenticity, yet he was trapped in a life where every gesture was rehearsed. He was the husband who wanted love, yet found himself entangled in a partnership that sometimes seemed more like a business contract than a marriage. Observers noticed the cracks even if they couldn't name them. At a charity event, he looked pale and withdrawn, answering questions with clipped words while Meghan dominated the conversation. At another gathering, he abruptly left midway through, citing exhaustion, but those who saw him described a man on the verge of tears. The press speculated about tensions, but what they missed was the deeper truth. These were the visible signs of a man at his breaking point, struggling to keep up the facade of control. And yet, in many ways, Harry's plight mirrors that of countless men around the world. How many husbands, fathers, and leaders silently crumble under the weight of expectations? How many put on a brave face while hiding the torment inside? This is what makes Harry's story so compelling. He is not just a prince. He is a mirror for the hidden battles so many fight. His breaking point is a reminder that even the most privileged are not immune to collapse. Still, for Harry, the consequences are magnified by the spotlight. Every stumble is broadcast. Every absence is noted. Every silence is dissected. The breaking point, once reached, cannot remain invisible forever. It leaks out in gestures, in whispers, in the weary look of a man who no longer has the strength to pretend. And as those leaks grow louder, the truth becomes harder to contain. The breaking point, then, is not simply the collapse itself. It is the moment when collapse collides with secrecy. It is the space between the doctor's solemn words and Meghan's desperate insistence on silence. It is the gap between Harry's private suffering and the world's public perception. That gap is widening, and the question is no longer whether it will break open, but when. This chapter leaves us with the image of Harry sitting alone in that vast mansion, a man surrounded by wealth and privilege, but starved of the one thing he needs most: honesty. His breaking point has arrived, and though the world has only glimpsed it in flashes, those closest to him know the truth. The prince who once stood tall is crumbling, and the silence that surrounds him may prove more dangerous than the breakdown itself. The doctor's revelation did not come with fanfare. It was not the kind of announcement that makes headlines instantly. Instead, it was a quiet confirmation, spoken with the gravity of a man who understood that his words could change everything. He had seen patients under immense stress before: soldiers, executives, public figures. But what he saw in Harry was something deeper. It was not just exhaustion. It was not just the weight of celebrity. It was a profound collapse of a man who had carried too many burdens for too long. The doctor used a term that froze the room: breakdown. For Harry, hearing those words may have been both terrifying and liberating. To name the beast is often the first step to taming it. Yet in this case, the moment of clarity never turned into healing. Because before the ink could dry on the medical notes, Meghan entered the equation. She understood the danger instantly. The doctor's words, if ever revealed, would not just describe Harry's condition, they would define it. And in an empire built on narrative, definition is everything. The revelation itself was clinical, rooted in the language of medicine. Symptoms cataloged: disrupted sleep, erratic moods, recurring panic attacks, moments of emotional withdrawal so deep they resembled dissociation. The patterns were undeniable. To anyone else, the path forward would have been clear: therapy, rest, treatment, time. But for Harry, whose life is scrutinized like no other, the path forward was tangled in contracts and commitments. The doctor knew this. That was why his voice carried not just the weight of diagnosis, but the burden of warning. If Harry did not face this now, the consequences would not just be personal, they would be catastrophic. Meghan's reaction to the revelation was strikingly different. Where the doctor saw a patient, she saw a liability. Where he saw a man in crisis, she saw a brand at risk. For Meghan, the timing could not have been worse. Their Netflix series was mid-production. Public appearances were lined up. Publishing deals were in motion. Any hint that Harry was too fragile to cope could topple the dominoes they had carefully arranged. Her instinct was not to ask what Harry needed, but to demand how this information could be controlled. Silence, she insisted, was the only option. This was the moment where two worlds collided: the world of medicine, where truth is the foundation of care, and the world of celebrity, where truth is often molded into whatever shape preserves power. The doctor found himself in an impossible position. His oath demanded honesty and transparency. Yet the pressure from Meghan was undeniable. To resist her would mean conflict with one of the most scrutinized couples on earth. To comply would mean burying the very truth his patient most needed to confront. Accounts from those familiar with the situation suggest the exchange was tense. The doctor explained that Harry's symptoms were not temporary stress, but signs of a serious mental health crisis. Meghan countered with questions about confidentiality agreements, about the legal protections of patient privacy, about how this diagnosis could be framed in softer terms. The language became a battleground. The word breakdown was avoided. Euphemisms like exhaustion or adjustment disorder were floated. It was an exercise not in healing, but in public relations. What makes this revelation so powerful is not just the diagnosis itself, but the decision that followed. By choosing to conceal the truth, Meghan may have secured their short-term image, but she risked Harry's long-term health. The doctor knew it, even as he nodded under pressure. Silence may have bought them time, but time without treatment is a dangerous game. The revelation, once buried, became a ghost that haunted every subsequent moment. Every public smile, every interview, every photo shoot carried the weight of the truth that lay unspoken in a locked file. This chapter also forces us to consider the human cost of secrecy. For Harry, to know that his breakdown had been confirmed but concealed must have been devastating. Imagine the isolation of realizing that even your doctor's truth can be reshaped by the person closest to you. The very act of diagnosis, which should have been a lifeline, became another chain. It told him not that he was seen, but that his suffering was something to be hidden, something to be managed like a flaw in a public product. The doctor's revelation also marked a shift in power. In theory, Harry was the patient, the one in need of care. In practice, Meghan became the gatekeeper of what care he could or could not receive. She controlled the narrative, the access, the flow of information. The doctor's role, once centered on Harry's health, now revolved around Meghan's demands. It was a distortion of the therapeutic relationship, one that placed branding above healing. And yet, the revelation could not be fully buried. Whispers began to emerge. Staffers overheard fragments of tense conversations. Friends noticed Meghan's increased protectiveness whenever Harry's well-being was mentioned. The more she insisted that everything was fine, the more people suspected it was not. Ironically, her efforts to conceal the truth may have drawn more attention to it. The revelation, hidden in files and softened in language, seeped into the air around them. It became an open secret, the kind that grows louder the more it is denied. The power of this chapter lies in the tension it creates. A doctor speaks the truth. A wife demands silence. A husband is caught between them, too broken to fight, but too visible to collapse unnoticed. It is a collision of duty, ambition, and vulnerability. The revelation is not just medical, it is moral. It asks whether a person's health can ever be sacrificed for image, whether silence can ever be justified when the cost is a human soul. By the end of this chapter, the stakes are clear. The doctor has spoken, but his words are buried. Meghan has silenced the truth, but at what cost? And Harry, the man at the center of it all, has been diagnosed not just with a breakdown, but with the cruelest fate of all, to suffer in silence while the world believes he is thriving. Control can take many forms. Sometimes it is spoken loudly, through commands and demands. Other times it is quiet, subtle, woven into gestures and silences that steer a narrative without a word being uttered. In the story of Prince Harry's collapse, Meghan's control was neither subtle nor invisible. It was deliberate, firm, and unyielding. This was the moment where Meghan's iron grip became undeniable. When the doctor's words hung in the air like a sentence too heavy to bear, Meghan did not flinch. Those close to her describe a woman who knows how to take command of a room, who rarely accepts a reality she cannot reshape. In her world, perception is power, and reality can be bent if framed carefully enough. To Meghan, the diagnosis was not a medical truth, it was a threat to be neutralized. Her instinct was immediate. No one could know. Not the press, not the palace, not even some of their closest allies. The fewer who understood Harry's condition, the easier it would be to manage the fallout. This iron grip extended beyond the doctor's office. Inside the walls of their Montecito home, Meghan began to dictate the flow of information with precision. Staff were told never to mention Harry's health in front of guests. Friends who asked too many questions found themselves distanced. Even Harry's own attempts to discuss what he was feeling were often redirected. She would tell him to focus on the future, on their projects, on the image they were building together. "We can't afford weakness," she allegedly reminded him during one heated moment. To her, every confession was ammunition for their enemies. Every admission of fragility, a headline waiting to be twisted. What makes this control so unsettling is not just its firmness, but its intention. Meghan was not silencing Harry to protect him from pain. She was silencing him to protect their empire. The stakes were high. Their Netflix deal was one of the largest contracts ever given to former royals. They were in talks with publishers for future works. Their relevance in Hollywood was tied directly to their ability to appear strong, united, and unbroken. If the truth of Harry's collapse emerged, it could all come crashing down. For Meghan, the risk was existential. To lose control of the narrative was to lose everything. Observers have long debated Meghan's ability to command the spotlight. She has a history of reshaping stories to her advantage, of taking criticism and spinning it into sympathy. But in this case, her grip was tested in new ways. The challenge was not just external, managing the press or the palace, but internal. She had to manage her own husband, the man at the center of the crisis. This required not just strategy, but emotional manipulation. She reassured him when he doubted himself, but only in ways that served their public image. She discouraged him from speaking openly, framing it as self-preservation. She positioned silence not as suppression, but as strength. To a man already drowning, it sounded like a lifeline. In reality, it was another weight dragging him deeper. The iron grip also manifested in public. Watch their interviews closely and you can see it. Meghan answers first, often steering the conversation before Harry can speak. When he does, she subtly redirects or elaborates, ensuring their message remains aligned. To the casual viewer, it looks like teamwork. To those who know the backstory, it looks like control. Even small gestures, a hand on his knee, a glance when he speaks, take on new meaning. They are not merely affectionate. They are signals, reminders of the boundaries he cannot cross. For Harry, this grip was both comforting and suffocating. On one hand, Meghan offered structure, a sense of purpose, a shield against the chaos of the outside world. On the other, she denied him the freedom to express his pain honestly. His words were filtered, his emotions curated, his identity reshaped to fit the image of a man thriving outside the monarchy. Yet behind closed doors, He was anything but thriving. He was crumbling, and the more Meghan tightened her grip, the less space he had to breathe. The dynamic recalls the stories of other public figures whose partners became both their protectors and their jailers. History is filled with examples of ambitious spouses who guarded secrets to preserve power, often at the expense of the very person they claimed to love. Meghan's actions fit into this pattern, creating a chilling question. Was she shielding Harry out of love or silencing him out of fear? Inside the palace, whispers grew louder. Courtiers speculated about why Harry seemed absent from certain events. Family members wondered why he looked so withdrawn. Meghan deflected every inquiry, often with the same response. He's fine, just tired. To outsiders, it was plausible. To insiders, it was rehearsed. The uniformity of her answers only reinforced the suspicion that she was holding the narrative together by sheer force of will. And yet, the iron grip was not unbreakable. Cracks began to show. Harry's frustration leaked out in small ways, an offhand comment in an interview, a visible flash of irritation when Meghan interrupted him, moments where he looked away as if silenced mid-thought. These glimpses, fleeting as they were, hinted at the conflict beneath the surface. A man struggling to be heard. A woman determined not to let him speak freely. The irony, of course, is that Harry has always been the more relatable figure precisely because of his vulnerability. People connected with him when he spoke openly about grief, when he admitted to panic attacks, when he described therapy as life-saving. By silencing him now, Meghan was cutting off the very authenticity that made him valuable. Her grip may have preserved their contracts in the short term, but it risked destroying the one thing that gave their brand longevity: Harry's humanity. By the close of this chapter, the image is clear. Meghan's iron grip is not a rumor, it is a pattern. It extends from the doctor's office to their home, from private conversations to public interviews. It is a grip that holds together their empire, but squeezes the life out of Harry's voice. It is control dressed as care, silence disguised as protection. And it sets the stage for the next revelation: just how far Meghan is willing to go to keep the truth buried, even if it means watching her husband unravel in the shadows. The Netflix deal was more than just a contract. For Harry and Meghan, it was a lifeline, a validation of their choice to step away from the monarchy, and a promise that they could build an empire independent of Buckingham Palace. Worth nearly $100 million, it was one of the largest streaming contracts ever handed to a couple with no prior history in film production. To Netflix, the appeal was obvious: global names, royal scandal, and the promise of intimate storytelling that could rival any drama series. But beneath the glittering headlines announcing the deal, there was a shadow no one outside their inner circle could see. That shadow was Harry's deteriorating mental state. When the doctor confirmed that Harry was battling a breakdown, the timing could not have been more dangerous. Netflix was expecting deliverables, content that would justify the massive investment. Meetings were scheduled, creative outlines were being reviewed, and the cameras were beginning to roll. For Meghan, this was not just business, it was survival. The deal represented not only financial security, but also credibility in an industry where relevance is fleeting. Losing it would mean more than a financial blow. It would mean humiliation, proof to critics that the Sussexes could not sustain themselves without the monarchy. The weight of that deal hung over every decision they made. Meghan approached it with the precision of a strategist. Every storyline was carefully considered, every interview rehearsed, every frame curated to maximize drama while preserving their image. But behind the scenes, Harry's condition was making that process increasingly difficult. He would show up to planning sessions distracted, sometimes disengaged, struggling to focus on scripts and storyboards. His mind, clouded by exhaustion and anxiety, was not where Netflix needed it to be. Meghan understood the risk instantly. Netflix executives were sharp, seasoned professionals who had seen stars implode before. If they caught even a whiff of instability, the whispers would start. Could Harry be trusted to deliver? Could Meghan carry the weight of the project alone? Could this investment truly pay off? These questions terrified her because they threatened not only the deal, but their entire rebranding effort. Their value in Hollywood was tied directly to Netflix's bet on them. If the bet failed, the ripple effect would be devastating. It is here that Meghan's grip tightened even further. She became the buffer between Harry and the outside world, often stepping in to answer questions on his behalf, guiding conversations, and presenting him as more involved than he truly was. In production meetings, she would reassure executives that Harry was committed, that he was just tired from the workload, that he needed space to think. What she never revealed was that the man she was defending was collapsing behind closed doors. The empire they were selling depended on illusion, and she was determined to keep that illusion intact. The irony is that the very content Netflix wanted, authenticity, vulnerability, raw storytelling, was exactly what Harry's real breakdown could have provided. If they had been willing to show the truth, the world might have connected with Harry more deeply than ever before. But for Meghan, that level of exposure was unthinkable. Vulnerability could easily be spun as weakness. A breakdown could be branded as instability. In the ruthless world of Hollywood, there is little room for fragility. She chose instead to create a polished version of their lives, one that left no room for the truth the doctor had revealed. This decision came at a cost. Staff who worked on the Netflix projects described long days where Harry seemed absent even when physically present. At times, he would contribute bursts of insight, speaking passionately about themes of resilience and justice, only to retreat into silence moments later. Meghan would smooth over the awkward gaps, stepping in to elaborate on his points, ensuring the momentum never faltered. To those watching, it looked like teamwork. To those who knew better, it looked like desperation. The pressure of the Netflix deal also amplified the conflict within their marriage. Harry wanted to slow down, to focus on healing, to find balance in a life that had already taken so much from him. Meghan wanted to accelerate, to capitalize on the momentum, to secure their place as Hollywood royalty before the industry moved on. These competing desires clashed repeatedly. Meghan saw the deal as an opportunity too great to risk. Harry saw it as another chain binding him to expectations he could no longer meet. Each argument, each compromise, pushed him closer to the edge. The looming deadlines created a relentless cycle. The more Harry struggled, the more Meghan tightened control. The more she tightened control, the more Harry withdrew. And the more he withdrew, the harder it became to deliver the content Netflix demanded. It was a cycle with no exit, except one: to bury the truth of his breakdown so deeply that no one outside their home could find it. Meanwhile, Netflix's expectations only grew. Executives wanted compelling footage, personal revelations, and a narrative arc that would justify the investment. They wanted drama, conflict, and resolution. What they didn't realize was that the drama they were chasing was unfolding in real time, not on screen, but behind the scenes. The story they were paying for was not the one Meghan was giving them. It was the one she was hiding. This chapter underscores the cruel irony of their situation. A doctor had named Harry's condition, offering a chance for healing. But the timing collided with a deal that demanded performance, not recovery. Meghan chose the deal. The result was a man forced to play a role while his real self unraveled, a woman tightening her grip as cracks widened, and a streaming giant unknowingly funding the cover-up of a prince's collapse. By the end of this chapter, the stakes are clear. The Netflix deal is not just money. It is the cornerstone of their new identity. To lose it would be to lose everything they claim to have built. And so Meghan's decision was made. Harry's truth would remain buried, no matter the cost. The question that lingers is chilling. How long can a man act in a show about his life before the mask shatters completely? Behind the polished images of Montecito life, the sweeping gardens, the glossy magazine spreads, the staged interviews, there is a different world that few outsiders have seen. This is the world behind closed doors, where the cameras are gone, the staff are hushed, and the silence of a sprawling mansion grows heavy. It is here, away from the public eye, that the truth of Harry's collapse is most visible. For those who have caught glimpses of it, the contrast is jarring. The prince who smiles for Netflix cameras and charity galas is not the same man who wanders the corridors of his home late at night, lost in his thoughts, battling demons that refuse to rest. Those who have worked inside the household describe a pattern that became impossible to ignore. Harry's days often began late, not because of luxury, but because he struggled to find the energy to rise. The man who once woke before dawn during his military service now lingered in bed, staring at the ceiling, weighed down by exhaustion that no amount of sleep seemed to cure. When he did rise, He often drifted through the home in silence, moving from room to room as if searching for something he could not name. Staff noticed how often he sat alone in the garden, staring into the distance, seemingly oblivious to the beauty around him. Conversations at home became increasingly strained. Meghan, ever the strategist, filled the air with plans, schedules, and updates about projects. She spoke of deadlines, scripts, and interviews. Harry, by contrast, withdrew. When he did respond, his words were often short, sometimes tinged with frustration. Arguments, once rare, became more frequent. Small disagreements over appearances or schedules flared into tense exchanges, leaving the household uneasy. It was as if the walls themselves absorbed the tension, echoing with the strain of two lives pulling in opposite directions. The children, too, were shielded from the growing storm, but even they could not erase its presence entirely. Staff recalled moments when Harry seemed distant during playtime, present in body but absent in spirit. He would smile for the children, laugh when they demanded his attention, but when they ran off, his expression often fell back into blankness. For a man who longed to give his children the stability and love he lost so young, this detachment must have been agonizing. It was not a lack of love, it was the grip of depression, pulling him away even when he wanted to hold on. Behind closed doors, the doctor's words lingered like a shadow. Every time Harry faltered, every time he withdrew, those who knew the truth were reminded that this was not ordinary stress. This was a man in the midst of a breakdown. Yet the household was governed by silence. Meghan's directives were clear. No one was to discuss Harry's health openly, not with outsiders, not with the press, not even among themselves. This created an atmosphere of unease, where everyone tiptoed around the truth, pretending not to see what was right before their eyes. The mansion itself became a symbol of the contradiction. From the outside, it was a palace of success. Manicured lawns, elegant interiors, a sanctuary that reflected the triumph of Harry and Meghan's departure from the monarchy. Inside, it was a cage. The vast rooms, instead of offering comfort, echoed with emptiness. The walls, adorned with curated photographs and art, could not conceal the tension. For Harry, the very space that was meant to be his refuge became a reminder of the pressure he lived under. Each corner held the weight of expectations. Expectations to be strong, to be presentable, to be marketable. It was within these walls that Harry's most vulnerable moments unfolded. Some nights, he was said to pace restlessly, unable to sleep, replaying old memories of Diana, of his military service, of the endless conflicts with his family. Other times, he would sit alone in his study, the glow of a single lamp illuminating a man deep in thought, papers scattered before him but untouched. Staff occasionally overheard him speaking softly to himself, as if rehearsing conversations he would never have. These were not the actions of a man thriving. They were the signs of someone drowning silently. Meghan, meanwhile, maintained her role as the keeper of appearances. When cameras arrived, she orchestrated every detail, the clothing, the staging, the narrative. Harry was expected to step into his role on cue, to smile, to speak with conviction, to embody the version of himself the world wanted to see. Behind closed doors, the transformation was stark. Once the cameras left, the mask slipped, and the exhaustion returned. It was like watching an actor step off stage after the final curtain call. Except for Harry, there was no escape from the performance. The secrecy of the household only deepened the crisis. With no safe outlet for his struggles, Harry became more isolated. Friends who might have offered support were kept at a distance. Family, already estranged, were not allowed to see the full picture. Even those inside the home were limited in what they could say or do. The result was a man surrounded by people, yet profoundly alone. The silence, enforced by Meghan's iron grip, was suffocating. And yet, despite the heaviness of those walls, glimpses of Harry's true self still broke through. There were moments when his laughter with the children rang genuine, when he spoke passionately about veterans' issues, when his eyes lit up talking about Diana's legacy. These flashes revealed the man he once was, the man buried beneath the weight of collapse. They were reminders that healing was possible, if only the truth could be acknowledged. But as long as the doors remained closed and the silence enforced, those moments were fleeting. The chapter of life behind closed doors reveals the deepest contradiction of Harry's world. To the outside, he is a symbol of resilience, a prince who chose love and freedom over tradition. Inside his home, he is a man in crisis, trapped by the very silence meant to protect him. The mansion, the contracts, the image, all of it means nothing when weighed against the private suffering of a man denied the chance to heal. As this chapter closes, the image of Harry is haunting. A figure moving through corridors that feel more like prison walls than sanctuary, a husband silenced by love turned into strategy, a father torn between presence and absence. Behind closed doors, the truth is written not in headlines but in the weary lines of his face, in the silences that stretch too long, in the weight of a life that looks perfect only from the outside. And as the doors remain shut, the question grows louder. How long can the truth stay hidden before the walls themselves begin to crack? There is a difference between words spoken aloud and the silences that speak louder than anything. Harry's silent cry for help did not come in the form of interviews or dramatic statements. It came in the small gestures that only those paying close attention could notice. It was in the way his smile faded too quickly once the cameras turned off, in the way his posture sagged when he thought no one was watching, in the way his eyes often seemed to drift somewhere else entirely when he was supposed to be present. To the public, he looked like a man determined to forge his own path. To those close to him, he looked like a man trying to hold himself together with frayed threads. Harry has always been defined by contrasts. He is the prince who served on the front lines, the royal who rejected the palace, the outspoken advocate who often revealed more of himself than the monarchy wanted. Vulnerability had once been his strength. It made him human in a family often accused of being cold and unfeeling. But now, that very vulnerability was being buried. His cries for help could not be loud because loudness would shatter the carefully constructed empire. And so they became silent, expressed through subtle behaviors, hesitations, and absences that painted a picture for anyone willing to look beneath the surface. Friends described his growing tendency to retreat during social gatherings. At dinner parties, he would often excuse himself early, leaving Meghan to carry conversations. At public events, he lingered at the edges, sometimes staring off into the distance while photographers snapped pictures. Those who had known him in the military, when his confidence and humor were unshakable, were stunned at how withdrawn he had become. The once vibrant man who led comrades in the field now seemed hesitant, almost diminished, in rooms where he should have commanded attention. Even in interviews, where Meghan and Harry presented themselves as a united front, the signs were there. When asked direct questions, Harry would often pause too long before answering, as though struggling to find the words. Meghan frequently stepped in, finishing his sentences or redirecting the conversation. For viewers, it could look like partnership. For those who understood the context, it looked like a man being shielded or silenced from saying too much. His hesitations were his cry for help, the pauses that revealed more than words could. His work with veterans, once a source of energy and pride, also began to change. At gatherings, he sometimes appeared distracted, unable to fully engage. During speeches, his voice occasionally faltered, his passion dimmed. Supporters noticed the difference. The Harry who once spoke with fire about the Invictus Games now seemed burdened, as if the words themselves were heavy. The veterans he had once inspired could see that something weighed on him, something unspoken but undeniable. At home, his silent cries were even clearer. Staff reported moments where he would sit for hours in his study, not working but simply staring at old photographs of his mother. Others recalled seeing him wander the garden late at night, hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched, walking in circles as though searching for clarity in the dark. These were not the actions of a man at peace. They were the signs of someone trying to process pain too great to articulate. What made his cries particularly haunting was the contradiction between his public advocacy and his private reality. Harry had built much of his public identity on championing mental health. He had told others to speak up, to seek help, to reject the stigma of silence. Yet when his own breakdown came, he could not follow his own advice. He was trapped in silence, not by choice but by the circumstances of his marriage and the demands of their brand. The man who urged others to break their silence was forced to live within his own. For Meghan, these silences were dangerous. Every hesitation, every withdrawal, every distant look risked becoming a story. And so she worked tirelessly to cover them. When Harry fell quiet, she spoke louder. When his attention drifted, she redirected it. When he seemed absent, she reminded everyone of how hard he was working. To the outside world, this created the illusion of balance. Inside, it only deepened Harry's isolation. His cries for help were drowned out not by noise, but by carefully crafted silence. The most tragic part of Harry's silent cry is that it was heard by many, but acted on by few. Those around him, friends, staff, even the doctor, recognized the signs. Yet the grip of Meghan's control and the weight of their contracts kept everyone from intervening too strongly. To speak out would be to betray trust, to risk retaliation, to potentially destroy careers tied to the Sussex brand. And so the silence continued, even as Harry's cries grew louder in their quietness. Publicly, the cracks began to show. At a charity event, Harry stumbled over his words, his hands trembling slightly as he read from prepared notes. Meghan smiled reassuringly beside him, but the footage spread quickly online. Commentators noted that he seemed nervous or unprepared. Few recognized it for what it was, a man struggling under the invisible weight of mental collapse. His cry for help had gone unnoticed by most of the world, even as it played out before their eyes. By the end of this chapter, the image is stark. Harry's silent cry for help is not a single moment, but a pattern woven into his daily life. It is in the way he retreats from crowds, in the pauses before he speaks, in the nights spent wandering alone. It is in the contrast between the fire he once carried and the exhaustion that now defines him. His silence is not absence. It is presence in its most haunting form. And though few respond, the message is clear. This is a man who needs help but is trapped in a world where silence is safer than truth. Meghan's calculated moves were never random. To those watching closely, each decision, each statement, each appearance seemed meticulously timed. She has long understood the currency of perception, and in Hollywood as in royalty, perception is everything. In the months following the doctor's revelation about Harry's breakdown, Meghan's strategy hardened. Every step she took was designed to shield their empire from collapse, even if it meant burying the truth further beneath layers of carefully crafted narrative. In public, Meghan doubled down on visibility. She arranged interviews, appeared at charity events, and made sure the Sussex name remained in the headlines. To the world, this was evidence of their continued relevance. To those who knew the truth, it was a smokescreen, a way to divert attention from Harry's struggles by keeping the focus on her. When questions about Harry's state did arise, Meghan deflected with rehearsed ease. "He's working on projects," she would say. "He's just taking time for family." The repetition of these lines became a script, designed to end curiosity before it grew dangerous. Her control over Harry's appearances also became sharper. When he seemed too fragile for certain events, Meghan would quietly step in, offering excuses about scheduling conflicts or travel fatigue. When he did appear, she ensured the setting was safe, controlled environments where she could steer conversations, soften his hesitations, and prevent probing questions. Every smile, every gesture was choreographed to present the image of unity. The reality, of course, was far different. Harry was unraveling, but Meghan's moves made it appear as though he was thriving. This strategy extended beyond the public stage. Behind closed doors, Meghan controlled the flow of information with precision. Staff were briefed on what to say and what not to say. Friends who raised concerns were told everything was under control. Even Harry's attempts to open up were often met with redirection. She would tell him to stay focused, to remember what they were building, to think of the bigger picture. In her framing, his pain was not a crisis but a distraction. The empire came first. The calculated nature of her actions raises questions about motive. Was she protecting Harry from a media machine eager to exploit his vulnerability? Or was she protecting herself and their brand from collapse? Perhaps it was both. Meghan has always positioned herself as Harry's protector, the woman who stood by him against the institution of monarchy. Yet her protection often seemed indistinguishable from control. By silencing him, was she shielding him, or herself? Observers noticed the shift in their dynamic. In earlier interviews, Harry had been the one to speak openly, often sharing painful memories. Meghan would add context, but rarely interrupted. Now, the roles reversed. Meghan became the primary voice, while Harry lingered in the background. It was subtle but telling. She was no longer just part of the narrative. She was controlling it entirely. For audiences unfamiliar with the backstory, it looked like confidence. For those aware of the hidden struggles, it looked like calculated dominance. Meghan's moves also extended into the realm of media management. Friendly journalists were given access, while critics were frozen out. Stories were leaked selectively, designed to highlight her humanitarian work, her fashion choices, her projects. Harry's name was often included, but in secondary roles, as if his presence was meant to support her spotlight rather than share it. The message was clear. Meghan was the driver of their brand, Harry the passenger. Whether this was intentional or simply a reflection of circumstance, the effect was the same. His voice grew quieter as hers grew louder. Yet these moves came with risk. The more Meghan controlled, the more the cracks in the narrative became visible. Viewers noticed Harry's hesitations, his distant looks, his rare moments of visible frustration when interrupted. Commentators began to speculate, asking why Harry seemed diminished in his own story. Meghan's grip, while strong, could not erase every trace of truth. And the more she tightened it, the more obvious it became that something was being hidden. Her calculated decisions also spilled into their family relations. Meghan ensured contact with the royal family remained limited, preventing opportunities for them to see Harry's true state. She insisted on managing communications, filtering what was shared and what was not. This deepened the divide between Harry and his family, making reconciliation even harder. For Meghan, this was strategic. The fewer outside influences Harry had, the more she could shape his reality. For Harry, it was another layer of isolation, another silent crime muffled beneath her control. But perhaps the most telling sign of her calculated approach was the way she framed Harry's silence as strength. In interviews, she would praise his resilience, describing him as thoughtful, deliberate, even reserved. It sounded flattering, but it masked the truth. What she called resilience was actually withdrawal. What she called thoughtfulness was exhaustion. Her words turned his symptoms into virtues, ensuring the public saw dignity where there was actually suffering. By the end of this chapter, the picture of Meghan's calculated moves is unmistakable. Each decision was made with precision, each action designed to preserve the empire they had built. But in doing so, she transformed Harry from a man with his own voice into a figure curated for her strategy. His breakdown, once diagnosed, became not a call for healing but a problem to be managed. Her moves may have preserved their contracts, their image, their influence, but they did so at the cost of Harry's truth. The haunting question is whether Meghan believed she was protecting Harry or merely protecting herself. To her, the two may have been inseparable. To Harry, the difference was everything. His cries for help were drowned out by her strategy, his vulnerability buried beneath her calculations. And as the world continued to consume the polished version of their lives, the truth of his collapse remained hidden behind the veil of her control. The royal family has always lived in a world of whispers. Every illness, every conflict, every scandal is carefully managed behind palace walls before the public is ever allowed a glimpse. When it comes to Prince Harry, the estranged son who has chosen to live continents away, the whispers reached them slowly, but they reached nonetheless. His absence at family events, his distracted demeanor in rare reunions, his stumbles in public appearances, all of it added fuel to growing concerns. And when the first murmurs of a doctor's diagnosis circulated through the corridors of Buckingham Palace, those who knew him best could no longer dismiss it. Harry was in trouble, and Meghan, in her determination to control the narrative, was keeping the truth sealed. Charles, now king, has seen the price of silence before. He watched his own mother conceal her ailments until the very end. He knew the damage done when Princess Diana's battles with depression and bulimia were hidden rather than confronted. For him, the suggestion that his youngest son was collapsing under the weight of a breakdown must have carried a heavy irony. Harry, once the champion of openness about mental health, was now trapped in the same secrecy that had haunted his family for generations. But for Charles, there was also frustration. His relationship with Harry had already been strained by the Oprah interview, the Netflix series, and the memoir that painted the monarchy in cruel light. Reaching out to his son was no longer a simple act of paternal concern. It was complicated by distrust, resentment, and the fear that anything he said could be twisted for profit. William, too, watched with unease. He and Harry had once been inseparable, bound by the shared trauma of losing their mother. Yet their bond had frayed into open hostility. Still, when whispers of Harry's breakdown began to grow louder, William could not ignore them. His public composure never cracked, but those close to him said he was deeply unsettled. He understood better than anyone the pressures of being royal, the cost of living in a world where every move is judged. For him, Harry's collapse was both tragic and infuriating. Tragic because it was his brother in pain. Infuriating because it was happening in a world Meghan had built, far from the structures that might have offered some form of stability. Kate, ever the diplomat, saw the situation differently. Her concern was not just for Harry, but for the image of the monarchy itself. She understood how damaging it could be if the public learned that Harry was unraveling while the palace appeared indifferent. She pushed for compassion, urging William and Charles to consider not just the family's reputation, but Harry's humanity. Yet even she knew the limits of what could be done. Meghan's control over Harry was tight, their access to him limited. Reaching him directly was nearly impossible without triggering further conflict. Other members of the family responded with the familiar mix of concern and caution. Princess, and pragmatic as ever, viewed the situation through the lens of history. Royals had always concealed weakness. Illness was hidden, struggles ignored, an image preserved at all costs. For her, Meghan's actions, however controlling, were simply a modern version of what the palace had done for centuries. The difference was that Meghan's motives were personal, tied to contracts and branding, rather than the survival of the monarchy. Inside the palace, discussions grew tense. Advisors debated how much to intervene, if at all. Should the family attempt to reach Harry privately, offering support in spite of the estrangement? Or should they remain silent, wary of being dragged into yet another public spectacle? Every option carried risk. Extending a hand could be spun by Meghan as manipulation. Remaining silent could be framed as cruelty. It was a lose-lose scenario, one that left the family in a state of uneasy watchfulness, observing from afar as Harry's condition deteriorated. The public, of course, remained largely unaware of the depth of concern within the palace. Occasional stories surfaced in tabloids, suggesting Harry was struggling, but without confirmation they remained speculation. Meghan's iron grip ensured no official word escaped. Yet palace insiders noted the timing of certain invitations, the careful way in which events were planned, as if leaving space for Harry should he choose to return. These gestures, small as they were, revealed a family trying to keep a door open even as it seemed unlikely he would walk through it. What makes this chapter compelling is the contrast between the family's silence and their private unease. They knew the truth, or at least enough of it to be alarmed, but they were bound by the very traditions Harry had sought to escape. Royals do not air their private pain, not even to help one of their own. In this, Harry's plight was a cruel mirror. He had fled the monarchy to escape silence, only to find himself trapped in an even harsher one, dictated not by courtiers, but by his own wife. There were also fears of history repeating itself. The monarchy has been haunted for decades by the way it handled Diana's struggles. Her cries for help were ignored, her pain dismissed, her truth silenced until it was too late. For Charles and William, the thought that Harry might suffer a similar fate was unbearable. Yet the irony was clear. If they intervened, they risked confirming Meghan's narrative of a cold, meddling family. If they stayed silent, they risked repeating the very mistakes that had destroyed Diana. The parallels were impossible to ignore, and the tension weighed heavily on them all. By the end of this chapter, the image is stark. The royal family watches from across the ocean, caught between concern and caution, between history and the present. They see a son, a brother, a nephew unraveling in plain sight, yet feel powerless to intervene. Meghan's grip keeps the truth sealed. Harry's cries for help remain unheard, and the monarchy, bound by its traditions, does what it has always done best. It watches and waits.